Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Straight Talk. Straight Talk, Scylla and Charybdis, a classy Odyssey-themed title for this week's show. Scylla and Charybdis were two key characters in Christopher Nolan's cinematic epic. Two sea monsters that each menaced Odysseus' ship from opposite sides. You can probably see where I'm going with this one. It is not unlike the situation in the market right now, but with Houthis and Iranians instead of sea monsters. North Sea dated Brent back above $90, but in fact is actually looking relatively weak compared with Dubai, which is also above $90 a barrel. So the premium of sweet to sour crude has narrowed. And that is because, once again, Asia's access to oil is being squeezed due to its dependence on southbound flows through the 𝗬𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 and the Hormuz Straits. And at the same time, Europe is looking better supplied. Saudi Arabia is diverting oil north into the Mediterranean because it's become harder to ship south, and Ukraine appears to have paused attacks on CPC oil shipments in the Black Sea. So Asia's looking relatively tight, and that comes just as we're seeing signs of returning Chinese oil demand and increasing competition for supply in Asia. So guys, John, Nader, let's start with you, John. Let's start with Iraqi flows, because these have been a real theme in recent weeks. Will Iraq manage to get its oil out of the Strait to market in the same way the UAE has been doing? We've seen a bunch more Iraqi crude being sold in the spot market, but I'm curious how much is actually getting out of the Strait, right? It's been pre-sold, but can it actually be supplied?
So what's most interesting about this is that essentially, when the MOU collapsed, we had 2 to 3 weeks in which Iran would essentially let nobody out through. But in August now, that has started to ease, and we've started to see more stuff coming out. UAE has moved some stuff, and Iraq was actually one of the first movers in the same way that they were before the MOU, back when the US-Iran war first started. Iraq was again one of the first people to start getting crude out. What's most significant about this is that they're also using mainstream tankers. So we've seen things, you're going to spot a theme here: Tanzania prosperity, Finland prosperity, Jamaica prosperity. They're all prosperity, and prosperity means Sinokor. So Sinokor, the major South Korean owner, it's probably the largest VLCC owner in the world, at least on the spot market. And they are carrying Iraqi crude cargoes out. So we're getting, sort of $1.5 million barrels a day loading. And we're seeing a lot of that actually getting out. Now, obviously, there's debate as to what exactly is the deal there. It's unlikely that they're sneaking that much out. So there's presumably some sort of arrangement in place. But these cargoes are actually getting through the Strait and mostly going east.
Yes, no, that's fascinating. So brave seafarers there on the Sinokor ships. And of course, we are seeing the Saudis also starting to sell their cargoes on an STS basis, a ship-to-ship basis, in the Gulf of Oman, in the same way that the Emiratis began doing back in May. And effectively, this would mean taking on the riskiest freight leg of the journey themselves, and then selling it to their customers once they get it out of the danger zone. But this primarily seems to be crude from Ras Tanura inside the Strait, not from Yanbu in the Red Sea. So how are Saudi's Yanbu exports getting to market now, John?
So Yanbu exports have actually fallen off a lot. The situation that we saw in July is that we had China, India, and Pakistani linked vessels going down through the 𝗬𝗵𝗿𝗆 Strait and eastwards. We haven't really seen that replicated in August. Almost all of the stuff that's coming out as part of the August program has been going straight to 𝗬𝗏 through the 𝗬𝗵𝗿𝗆 pipeline to Sidi Karir and being sold FOB Sidi Karir. There have been some ships that have loaded in Yanbu and gone north through the Suez Canal. So they've part loaded in Yanbu and then they've finished their load in Sidi Karir. So those are essentially the two options that are running. There's one VLCC so far this year that has gone south and gone to Pakistan, but the Chinese trade appears to have completely vanished. Additionally, you mentioned ras tanura. Saudis are now also getting back into the ras tanura game. And again, who do we see as the two ships that are coming out? Bulgaria Prosperity, Singapore Prosperity. Here goes Sonacor again. So they are really making hay here while the sun shines. So big drop off in 𝗬𝗵𝗿𝗆, starting to see a bit of an uptick in ras tanura in the Hormuz side. And it feels that conditions are starting to ease slightly. But again, much as we spoke about in previous podcasts, this is all very politics dependent, and it can all stop at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's and that the situation with 𝗬𝗵𝗿𝗆 is especially interesting, of course, because I guess it's unclear how much of the crude that had been coming out from Saudi Arabia into the Red Sea at 𝗬𝗵𝗿, slightly over 3 million barrels a day, can go north through the Suez. And by extension, how much they're going to have to try and get south past the 𝗬𝗵𝗆𝗍𝗶. I think that that kind of brings us on to the political situation, Nader. You were saying you guys in Dubai had your first missile alarms for a couple of weeks last night. Absolute nightmare. I wonder if you could give us a simplified explanation for the political developments in Iran that you've been watching lately. There's been a lot of talk about the further consolidation of power by security cadres in Tehran, and whether that changes the dynamics of the Iranian negotiating position with regards to the US.
Sure. Look, I mean, there's nothing simple about Iranian politics. I'll do my best, so just bear with me. Look, one thing we're hearing, or we were hearing rather, from the start of this war, and specifically after, Israel and the US took out Iran's former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was that this could end up having the opposite effect to what the US was and Israel were essentially after. If you remember, the US for some time now, even since the days of Trump's first term in office, they've been using this terminology of, we want Iran to become a normal country. Pompeo was using this back in the day. J.D. Vance is using this more recently. Trump as well himself. So the idea here was that, cut off the head of the snake, Khamenei goes, the regime will begin to crumble. We're golden. But obviously, in the days and the weeks after, as Iran continued to fight back, it became increasingly clear that the regime was not only not crumbling, but it was reforming. And reforming into what? Potentially reforming into something worse, so to speak.
It is amazing to me, the idea that you can bomb a country and hope that liberals percolate to the top of the political system.
Yeah,
I think
because, I mean, ultimately, this is the thing. The Trump administration was fed this kind of fairy tale that everything is in place to just basically solve itself as soon as this one problem disappears. The thing is, the Iranian regime and Islamic Republic generally has been, it has incredibly deep roots. And this is something I personally have been warning against, that it's not as simple as that. And there's a reason why president after US president did not go into Iran the way that Trump did, because, there was something very complicated awaiting them. So anyway, to go back to what I was saying, I mean, this was something that many people were worried about, that ultimately we could see a hardening of the Iranian position, and we could essentially see what was already a hard line. The Islamic Republic is by no means a open, free, liberal society, but we could see things get even more conservative. And frankly, that's exactly what we've been seeing over the last few months, and particularly over the last few weeks. We've been hearing more about it. I mean, steps have been taken to kind of gradually shift the decision-making, the authority in the country towards the IRGC, towards the military, towards, the even more hardline elements of the leadership structure, and away from kind of the more, let's say, moderate parts of leadership, i.e. the government and the president, 𝗬𝗫𝗍𝗍 Pezeshkian. And we've recently seen a kind of shift, also a return of these kind of names that we were seeing back in the day. Essentially, we've seen the terminology that these are individuals that were around during the Iraq War, or prominent during the Iraq War. These are now, gentlemen in their 70s who are coming back to the fore. Mohsen Rezaei, who's been former head of the IRGC in the 80s, he's now back kind of head of the Iran's top decision-making body, the Supreme National Security Council. So this all kind of, it clearly shows the direction of travel in Iran that is not what the West would have wanted to see. And with those changes, you essentially have more distrust towards the US, then it already existed. Because remember, Trump is the individual who essentially punked the Iranians 3 times. In first in 2018 with the 𝗬𝗎𝗶𝘶, he pulled them out. And in 2025, before the 12-day war. In 2025, in the middle of negotiations, he basically gave the green light to Israelis to attack. And then again, in the middle of negotiations this year. So there was already a lot of distrust that has heaped. We've had a lot more distrust come into the mix now. And essentially, this new iteration, the people in power now essentially have no intention of allowing such a thing to happen again. The messaging is harder. The willingness to fight is greater. And at this point, Iran feels, or many in Iran feel, that the lull that we're in at the moment, it's just basically, we're waiting for the new round, a new phase of the war. So they're prepared and are preparing. Trump clearly wants a way out of this, but Iran is not going to make it easy for him. They have insisted and continue to insist that they're not interested in a ceasefire. They want a complete end to the war. So, as I've said before, Iranian threshold is higher.
I think this raises a really interesting question. I just want to pick up on that point. The idea that there is a very personal animus between Tehran and US President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, just to explore that counterfactual for a second, does that mean that any lasting peace might in fact be predicated on a new occupant of the White House, untarnished by the kind of, as you say, punked tendencies that we've seen from Donald Trump with regards to Iran?
Look,
we would really need a new president. Is that what is?
You very well might. I don't see any kind of lasting peace or an agreement or something with this current administration because of the characters that are involved on both sides. But also, yes, I mean, there's a bad taste in both sides' mouths against one another. The issue is with Iran, they're very aware of the US political system. They're aware that they could spend 3-4 years negotiating something, and then only for a new president to come in, everything starts from zero. This is what the hardliners in particular have been insisting and pushing forward against any of the moderates and reformists who have said we have to negotiate with the US. So this problem is always going to persist, but definitely I think things prospects for something more stable or lasting peace, quote unquote, would dramatically increase, I think, once there's a different man,
different hand at the tiller, to return to our Odysseus theme. And of course that bad blood, John, it does seem to be showing up. There does seem to have been an increase in the number of attacks on shipping that we've seen in the last few weeks. Can you kind of break down for us, what those have been and how serious they are?
So a lot of the attacks this time seem to have gone directly towards ADNOC tankers. So there's been 3 ADNOC tankers attacked in the last week, and fairly heavily attacked, both drones and missiles. We're not talking about warning shots or side shots here. They have been struck. And so far, there are no casualties and nothing's been sunk, but a very clear statement appears to be made here that, especially when we're seeing Basra exports start to go up, going through the Strait, and we're seeing, Ras Tanura, the Saudis are getting their first couple of ships through the Strait, and yet ADNOC's been hit 3 times. So I think that is particularly relevant. ADNOC was one of the first movers here, and they have been shuttling both LPG and crude, and they have been shuttling it through using their own ships fairly successfully, taking on that risk themselves. The Iranians clearly have felt in the last fortnight that this has now gone too far, and they are definitely making a bit of a statement. So although we can say that there is that additional risk and those additional attacks, we do also have to take into account what we discussed earlier, where there's more Iraqi going through and we're seeing the first Saudi go through. And so the politics of the region are continuing to evolve. Not all countries are able to get through the Straits at the same time, and the Iranians are definitely appearing to keep a throttle on shipping. They are letting a certain amount out, but the moment that they feel that level gets to a situation that it starts to affect potentially their leverage or something like that, then they do appear to strike back at shipping. Again,
on that point, I think that's so fascinating that we don't know precisely why these ships have struck, whether it is simply the Iranians saying don't get too comfortable with this current state of affairs, or whether, and I don't know if I can bring you back in for a second, Nader, whether there may be some political aspect to, the renewed attacks of on UAE ships by Iran. Do we have any sense of why these are being struck? Is it because people are getting too comfortable? Is it some sort of political clash between Iran and UAE?
I'd say probably it's a bit of both. But the thing is, the UAE, one thing that has been clear to us, at least those of us sits in the region right now, is that the UAE has clearly, there seems to be some kind of understanding, or has been for some weeks now, because whereas it was being targeted the most in the first phase of this war, right now it has not been. I mean, for large part, we mentioned the alerts that we got last night. Those are the first alerts in weeks, if not months. So I would be surprised if this was directly targeting ADNOC ships because they're ADNOC ships. But I at the same time, I think ADNOC has been one of those companies that have been most, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've been one of the most kind of bold to kind of continue shipping through the Strait during this period. So, chances of probability, instead of probability, they're more likely to get hit the more tankers you have going through. So I think it's probably a bit of both, but if I had to choose, it'd probably be the former rather than the latter.
Don't get too comfortable. And John, are you seeing, there have been any Iraqi ships struck, or 𝗬𝗍 ships carrying Iraqi crude have not been struck so far? So
no, and a lot of these 𝗬𝗍 ones, we can't see them because they have their AIS off. So we're tracking them as best we can with satellite and with various other things. They do appear to be using the southern Omani route rather than the Iranian route, and all of Iran's strikes have taken place on that Omani route. So there is definitely a situation where some things on that route are being struck, some things are not. What is the differentiation between them? Are there deals in the background? That's a question. Do some of them have authorization? That's a question. Are some of them tacitly just being hand-waved through? Or does Iran have a limited ability to strike on that route? These are all sort of very key questions. But on the actual Iranian routes, the VLCCs and the crude from other Gulf countries does not appear to be going on those routes. It's all going on the Omani route, and some of that is being hit, some of it is not. At the moment, it's ADNOC that's been hit. I would also point out, and I think this is key, that the most recent flare-up between the US and Iran happened because of an excessive number of ships on those Omani routes. The Iranians opened by spending the weekend instructing ships to stop using it and divert. Some did, some didn't. And then they actively started striking ships on the Monday. So they monitor that route. They look at it closely. Perhaps they use it as a bit of a pressure release valve as part of their negotiations or something. But they do allow some things through and some things they hit.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating. I mean, the fact that we don't know precisely what is driving these strikes is, I think very much, in line with presumably what Iran is trying to achieve here. It increases volatility in the market. That increases the cost of trading. You've got to put up more collateral. Volatility in the market is still very, very high, and that does feed through again into the cost of crude oil. Nader, this was a weird one. President Trump recently threatened to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of US negotiations with Iran. All the more surprising because getting in the way of negotiations was literally the Omanis' role, I think, right? They certainly saw themselves as intermediaries, regarded by both the US and Iran as kind of an honest broker, especially as neither of the sides is talking to each other directly. What exactly is Trump's beef with Oman?
Look, this to me at least boils down to a fundamental misunderstanding on Trump's part of what Oman's role is here. Oman is a longtime U.S. ally. It has been working this entire time, as far as I'm concerned, in the interests of the region as a whole, and in turn, also by extension, in the interests of the U.S. Oman is, as you said, at least when it comes to Iran in particular, it's been the main mediator when it's come to Iran issues, dealing with the West, dealing with the US, dealing with Europe, so on and so forth. In this case, yes, it's been doing its utmost since the beginning of the war to sit on the fence and to sort of engage with both sides, specifically to be that go-between. Naturally, sitting on the fence has irked some in the Gulf, some of its neighbors here, and clearly the US and Trump, who has kind of taken the stance of, if you're not with us, you're against us, which I think, kind of badly oversimplifies the situation. It's a difficult situation to be in. There's no question about it. And the thing is, where we see the Omani fingerprints most is on this Hormuz issue, which has clearly, as everyone can see, become the main issue that the Trump administration is trying to tackle. We've said it on previous episodes, Hormuz is and will continue to be Iran's biggest point of leverage. It's not going to let this go easily. With every single passing week, Iran looks less likely to concede or to loosen its grip, understandably so. The US and the Trump administration also in recent kind of weeks and days have hardened their own stance on Hormuz. Just this week, he was saying it's well, he constantly seems to say that it's open when it's not. And just this week, he said that, you know, he'd like it to be U.S. territory soon. So we'll see where that goes. But I mean, talks between Iran and the U.S., yes, not direct, but indirect talks, they have not achieved very much in, many weeks on many issues. But Iran and Oman have been talking.
They've been talking, right? They've not been shooting each other.
Exactly. They have been
so
talking.
They've been trying to thrash out a mechanism for
Correct.
Apportioning revenue for traffic through the Strait, and
it's essentially it's essentially a framework on which, or a mechanism by which the Strait will be administered, by which traffic will be administered through the Strait. With we've talked about tolls and fees. That's all part of the system. The caveat here is that this framework, at least from the Iranian side, is only going to be one that really comes into effect in a post-war period. So it's not that coming to agreement on this will bring the war to an end because everyone's happy with how it works. No, the war needs to end, and then this is how things will be administered going forward. So essentially, Trump, instead of going and from my standpoint, instead of going and threatening Oman, because this is now the second time that he's threatened to bomb them over the last few months, not the first, what he really should be doing is engaging with Oman, making sure that the U.S. voice gets to those negotiations, gets to that table, because the Omani role ultimately is to basically water down what are incredibly maximalist positions. So it's about being smarter.
Role.
So just be smarter about how you engage with this, because Oman is an asset. Use it.
Yeah. And we're going to have to wrap up in a couple of seconds, but I just wanted to get both of your thoughts on this. Of course, the 60-day memorandum of understanding, the MOU, that formally expired this week. I say formally, it had effectively been dead for some time. Nader, where does that leave prospects for peace? And John, where does that leave the outlook for shipping through these troubled straits? Let's start with you, John.
So I think what's key here is that Iran is still in control of the Strait. And although we have seen some increase in crude exports going through the Strait, Iran is going to shut those down if they still get too high. So the shipping market, we may see, we're probably at about the max that we're going to see traveling through the Strait. They're not going to allow more out. So the shipping market is going to remain very heavily disrupted. We are still seeing a lot of people trying to stock up, a lot of European refiners trying to stock up, a lot of people buying WTI crude. And then on top of that, China is not in the mix. So we have an extremely disrupted shipping market and no activity from really the world's biggest shipper of basically anything. So, the scale of the disruption that we've got now, at some point, China must move. The scale of the disruption we've got now is not a patch on the disruption that we could potentially have. And it's already very, very disrupted.
And ballpark figure through the Strait, what kind of quantities of crude oil do you reckon we're seeing at the moment?
2-3 million barrels a day.
Right.
I mean, 4 to 5 ships max carrying crude. And, that's about what the Iranians have shown they're comfortable with before. The IMO evacuation plan took it up to about 40, and the Iranians shut that down almost instantly. So we're not getting up to 30 or 40. They will not permit that. Max 10 to 12 a day, which is about a third of what it should be. So crude specific.
I wonder whether if they have an informal cap on the quantity that they're tolerating through the Strait, they are, by targeting UAE ships, they're simply trying to rebalance the quantity of UAE versus Iraqi crude that's getting through. Nader, prospects for peace, any remote, distant, fragile?
Look, I'm not going to rule anything out. At this point, this war has produced all kinds of twists and turns. But to me, right now, from where we are, I think peace or a total end to this, it seems a long way off. As I said, distrust very high. You have two sides who don't believe that they are losing, two sides who continue to push maximalist demands, two sides that feel rightly or wrongly they can kind of outlast each other. In my sense, I think Iran probably is the one that can outlast Trump in the current situation, purely because they have less to lose. The Islamic Republic has been struggling under all kinds of crises for many, many years. It's almost written a playbook on how to do this. Trump, however, obviously has the global economy to think about. The situation at the moment is not good, and the longer this goes, the worse it gets. Iran has essentially last 2 days said that what it needs for the Strait of Hormuz to reopen is for the U.S. to essentially deliver on the promises it made under the now defunct and expired MOU. So there is a pathway there.
Probably lifting
sanctions. A great one. Yeah, so that's lifting sanctions. Well, lifting sanctions, unfreezing blocked assets, frozen assets, lifting the U.S. blockade on Iran at the moment, and essentially ending kind of threats and military operations, not just on Iran, but on all fronts. So there is a pathway there. It's not a great one for Trump, but frankly, Trump has no real good options on the table. So I think personally, it's ultimately going to come down to when he sees an off-ramp at the right time that he can stomach.
Well, I memean, on that cheery note, I think that is all we've got time for. Chaps, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone who's listened in. Dial in next week for the next episode of Straight Talk. I'm sorry we've been absent for a while. And in the meantime, for all your news, pricing, analysis, consulting needs, check out argusmedia.com. And we'll see you next week. Thank you very much and goodbye.